Chapter 13. Eli was awake when Michelle and Nathaniel walked in. On the walk up, Nathaniel warned her about their superior hearing and sense of smell, that Eli would know who was there before they'd even stepped foot in the two-bedroom apartment. If he couldn't smell them right away, he'd surely hear them. Sure enough, he called out from living room right as the door opened. Well, can't wait to hear what you two have been up to. Then shit. Nathaniel, why do I smell blood? He appeared at the end of the hallway, his brown eyes searching the couple. We went for a walk just now and got into it with a couple of lowlives. Nathaniel dropped his keys in a pretty wooden bowl and took Michelle's hand. This is our home, he told her with a welcoming smile. Come. Eli shook his head and his demeanor shifted to a friendlier one. Welcome. Let's give you the tour. It was a larger apartment than hers by far, but not obnoxious. They pointed out the changes they'd made to the place after moving in, both of them overlapping their explanations like two friends totally comfortable with each other would. The last stop was the living room after explaining the dividing screen used to keep the kitchen more separate and give the illusion of two rooms rather than one. She sat on their long modern couch and watched as Nathaniel recounted the events of the fight. He wasn't proud of the story and had no idea how much he'd impressed her back there. She was a bit stunned by all that had happened in so quickly a time, and being here in their home she felt very humbled. It was beyond her amazement to watch them talking, knowing now that they were both werewolves. Eli too. Their gestures and movements fascinated her. They looked like normal men save for the fact that they were both more masculine than a lot of the skinny-legged hipsters that seemed to be taking over the world. They were more like the men of Cary Grant's era, the kind who wore suits as comfortably if not more so than jeans. Michelle, Nathaniel said, and from the tone it wasn't the first time he'd tried to get her attention. Sorry, I must have been daydreaming, she smiled. Yes. Come to me. A wave of happiness drifted through her and she rose from the couch and crossed to where he stood by the bar. Eli was on the other side holding a drink. She slipped her arm around Nathaniel's back and he around hers. I'd like to formally introduce you to my oldest friend Eli Jackson. Eli, my future bride Michelle Nero. She held out her hand and he clasped it in his and shook it firmly, his dimple deep as his eyes danced. Pleasure to meet you, Eli. He laughed, let go of her hand, picked up his drink and shook his head. So, from the way she's looking at me? He trailed off, not wanting to say it aloud if he was wrong. Nathaniel gazed down at her with love. She knows. Yes. I showed her. Surprise exploded on Eli's face and he hooped. Wow, you showed her? That's a first right there. To her, he asked with his eyebrows up high. What did you think? She grinned and shrugged one shoulder. No big deal. He guffawed and hit the bar top. No biggie. Yeah, same shit, different day. Hear ya. Michelle laughed with him, his wonderful personality infectious. Already she was thinking of setting him up. But with which friend? It's amazing. Actually, thank you so much for trusting me with this. Although I'm still mad at you for that interview debacle. He made a face and brought up two more glasses. No, you're not. Glancing to his friend, he asked, we have to drink to this fucking miracle right here. Nathaniel tied down by a ball and chain. I never thought I'd see the day. Hey, Michelle objected with laughter in her eyes. I resent that term. Nathaniel picked her up, kissing her deeply as though they were alone. She returned the kiss with equal passion. If he didn't care about the audience, neither did she. And she felt so good in his arms. He set her back down and stared at her. Don't listen to this shithead. He's just jealous. Picking up the glass offered him, he held it up. Michelle did the same and Eli announced, to love. As she clinked her glass to theirs, she'd never felt so happy. What is this? Scotch, Eli said, drinking a hefty gulp. She took a small sip and felt the warm sting, wincing accordingly. Oh, that burns. I like it. Here they come, Nathaniel said, ear perked. You called them. Eli shrugged. I didn't know you were coming back here, but I had to tell them. Your declaration. He glanced to Michelle. I've got a big mouth. We don't keep any secrets. Be warned. Michelle smiled but looked at Nathaniel, wondering what they were talking about. He led her to the side as the sound of the front door opening reached her ears, the voices of Dark and Dontae growing louder. Oh no, she didn't want to see those guys right now. That Dontae was a little intimidating. Michelle straightened her spine and watched the two werewolves give her the once-over as they entered the room. From their faces, Nathaniel had been right about their senses of hearing and smell. They knew she was there before they'd walked in. Dontae was as intense as always, but Dark had a gleam in his eyes that was pure excitement and curiosity. His lecherous smile was gone, just like Nathaniel had told her it would be. Then frowns creased their foreheads at the exact same time. You smell like blood again, Dontae growled. What the hell? Dark exclaimed, staring at the dark-haired wolf at her side. Eli came out from the behind the bar to stand between the two pairs. All right. No one's killed. Calm down. He just did what we do practically every week. It's just bad timing is all, since after what happened. He glanced to Michelle. It's all right. You can talk about it. She eyed Dontae, wishing he wouldn't glare at her like that. Dark expressed loud relief, heading for the bar. Thank God for that. I need some peace and quiet again. Then he muttered, I never thought I'd hear myself say that. Looking to Dontae, he asked, What do you want? Michelle slipped her hand into Nathaniel's and held the bold stare of the blonde wolf. Dontae, Dark asked you what you'd like to drink. She smiled. He blinked and glanced over. Whatever. I don't care. He headed for the balcony and opened the curtains, looking at the city with his back to the room. She shared a look with Nathaniel and he squeezed her hand, saying to the others, I've asked Michelle to marry me. Dontae flipped around, his eyes wide. Dark's smile betrayed his shock, but he was clearly happy. Michelle's heart was beating fast and she remembered that Nathaniel had told her he'd need to be patient with his pack. He'd meant Dontae, that was plain, but it made her feel like she was coming between them. She wanted to be a part of what they had. Congratulations, man. Dark came forward and hugged his friend. He looked at Michelle like he didn't know what to do. She held out her arms. He laughed and gave her a huge bear hug. Wow, that's incredible news. Michelle was hyper-aware of the silent wolf to her right and she couldn't take it anymore. She walked to him and held out her hand. He told me. I showed her, Nathaniel added from behind her. She glanced over to him and he gave her an encouraging nod. This wasn't easy, but it was worth facing her nervousness to try. Knowing there was a wolf inside the intense blonde man made him all the more imposing. Dontae looked past her to Nathaniel, eyebrows lifted slightly. You showed her, he whispered, taking it in. He met her hopeful eyes, but his wall was up. Michelle continued with as gentle a voice as she'd ever used. You can trust me. I will never tell your secret to anyone. It's yours to tell, and I promise you that I will keep it safely guarded in my heart. Dontae huffed through his nose, not knowing what to believe. She could see doubt on his face. She kept her hand out for him and he looked down at it. We are all vulnerable now because of you. There was something in his voice that hurt her to hear. Empathy pulled a soft smile from inside her and she shook her head just a little. No, you are stronger, with more members to your pack and one of your own happier because of it. Give me time, you'll see who I am. He blinked, struck by her logic. She felt the three behind her relax. Then Dontae surprised her by pulling her in for a reluctant hug. It was tense and more than a little awkward, but she appreciated the effort and squeezed him back. He released her and took the glass. Nathaniel walked over to him. Are you done glowering so I can celebrate? Dontae smiled despite himself. Oh, all right. Then with exaggerated defensiveness meant for comedic effect, he muttered. I said in the interrogation that I liked her. Michelle cried out. So it was an interrogation? She threw an amazed glance around the four. I'm glad someone isn't calling that shit show an interview. They all laughed. She smiled at Eli, who was the loudest by far. Nathaniel's proud appraisal of her overjoyed her, and she knew he approved of her handling of Dontae. The five made themselves comfortable and spent the next hour talking with much laughter, each sharing stories about their Friday night. The other wolves censoring their tales slightly out of respect for the female company. After that hour, exhausted by the hour, the little sleep and all that had happened, Michelle found she couldn't keep her eyes open anymore. She excused herself to sleep in Nathaniel's room. He kissed her good night. Or good morning. I'll be in a little while. Okay, she said sleepily, leaving the four of them to talk and probably about her, she guessed, smiling to herself as she walked down the hall and into his room. His pillows smelled like him and she buried her face in one of them and breathed in the wonderful scent. She could hear their muffled voices far off through the walls, and as sleep took her over, she couldn't help but think this might all be a dream. She didn't know how long she'd been asleep when she felt him climb onto the bed, the heavy mattress giving slightly to his tall frame. Is the courthouse open on Saturdays? He asked. She blinked in the gray morning light, the curtains halfway open. Why? I want to see what paperwork has to be dealt with. He pulled the covers up over his naked body and let his muscles go lax as he sunk into the comfortable bed. She rose up on her elbow and looked at him. Wait, you're saying we're doing this soon? Monday too soon? Michelle yelped and covered her mouth. Are you serious? He shrugged and smirked at her. I keep surprising you. Her eyes were wide as dinner plates as she stared at his calm face. Of course. You keep surprising me. We just... He touched her lips to quiet her, pulling her to lie on his warm, muscular body. He felt so good that her objections felt silly. Could she really take this great a chance? Look, woman, we will have plenty of time to get to know each other when I've got a ring on your finger. Why do you want to wait? She sputtered quietly. I didn't say I wanted to wait. I'm just surprised. He laughed and kissed her, dropping his head back on the pillow, green eyes shining. You are only surprised because you can't believe it. You'll believe it when you're married to me and when I've said I do. She was unable to argue with that. He was right. He rubbed her back absently as he continued. I'm going to see if they're open. I've already set my alarm and told the guys. They're coming with us. Hope you don't mind. Then on Monday, if I'm able to take care of the legalities properly, I will make you my wife. Do you have any friends you want to invite? That drunk one, maybe? She burst out laughing, half from his calling Rose that, half from shock. Of course I have friends I want to invite. But be prepared for them to think we're crazy. I don't care what they think. He grabbed the back of her head and kissed her. She melted into him. Okay, she murmured against his lips, surrendering completely to the power of her feelings. He rolled them both over so that he was on top of her and moved open her legs with his knee. She gasped as he filled her with one thrust, encasing her mouth with his own. She sucked on his tongue as he groaned with pleasure. The soreness down there made her smile. It had been so long since she'd been with anyone, and here she was 3 times in one night with a man who wanted to marry her, and who she couldn't wait to call husband. They made love quietly. After Nathaniel whispered, Eli's probably listening. The way Nathaniel looked at her made her feel truly beautiful, something she hadn't ever really felt before now. Love has a way of opening the mind as well as the heart, and right then, in the brightening light of a city morning, Michelle felt hope spring to life and take root in her soul. Chapter 14. On Tuesday morning, DDN Incorporated didn't open its doors. Its 4 partners instead walked up the stone steps of City Hall on Worth Street, Nathaniel with marriage license in hand. They all wore black suits. Not quite matching, but it would do. His 3 packmates had no ties, their shirts unbuttoned, one buttoned down. Only Nathaniel wore a tie, a slender black one, so that he was distinguished from them. They turned quite a few female heads walking in, and even some male ones. Having to wait 24 hours after obtaining the marriage license was bullshit, Nathaniel muttered. Eli hit his back and gave him a shake as their footsteps echoed off the marble tile. She's going to show, Nathaniel grumbled. I'm just saying. He ignored the look Eli threw Derek and Dontae. He was just happy they respected his anxiety enough to keep their traps shut, unlike his roommate. He didn't want it voiced aloud, it made it more real. Nathaniel wanted to lock this down because he was afraid she'd wake up and realize he wasn't good enough for her, that he was just a monster from some horror film, and to marry such a thing was ludicrous. Fear had him in its unforgiving grip. All his veins were tight and his jaw hurt again from trying in vain to relax. It was no use. He was a mess on the inside. Your heart is racing abnormally fast, Eli warned. Shut up. As they neared the doors of the city's clerk's office, he looked around for her. Appointments were not needed, but they'd agreed to be here at 10 a.m. sharp. He flipped around and stuffed his hands into his slacks pockets. What time is it? Dontae looked as nervous as he did. He pulled out his phone and said with sobriety, 9:55. Nathaniel tried to inhale patience, but oxygen seemed to have left the room. Like a statue, he stayed staring at the hallway where they'd just been, his packmates at his side. People walked through the halls for different purposes. And when up walked a bride and groom, grinning from ear to ear. Nathaniel thought he might explode. Excuse me, the groom asked him, and Nathaniel moved aside, not realizing he was blocking the entrance. Thank you. You ready? He asked his bride-to-be. I can't believe we're doing this. They opened the doors and went in. Nathaniel couldn't look at his friends. Time. Dontae grated through his teeth. 10. Where is she? Durant groaned, tapping his feet. Just then, he heard her voice and his hands escaped his pockets as he took a couple steps toward the welcome sound. There were other female voices with her, and their heels clicked speedily along the floor, a clear sign they knew they were running late. Dontae sighed out all of his tension and Eli chuckled. You guys should see your faces. With nervous laughter in his voice, Durant said the obvious. Here they come. Around the corner appeared his future wife wearing a white floor-length, spaghetti-strap dress that hugged her in all the right places. Her hair was in loose, long curls and she wore no jewelry. In her hands was a bouquet of the orchids he'd given her, the resilient flowers beautiful still. She'd brought them all, and the effect was kind of funny since there were so many. She had two friends with her, the woman who was drunk at the club now sober, and with light dancing in her blue eyes as she tended to her friend's hair and kept talking non-stop. She wore a blue dress that complemented her eyes. The other was a redhead with wild wavy hair and chic wardrobe. The women didn't match, but it didn't matter. The redhead was looking at Nathaniel's party. She smiled at the males en route to them, and her eyes paused a moment longer when she saw Dontae. She glanced back quickly to Michelle. Nathaniel walked to meet them and he felt as though he could finally breathe. He gave her no sign he'd been nervous, and when he stood before her, she and both her friends stared up at him. You are so beautiful. She blushed and held out her hand. He took it and was about to walk away with her, but she tugged on him. This is Rose. She indicated the woman with the light brown hair who he'd seen before. Rose, nice to meet you. He nodded, not willing to let go of Michelle's hand. And Laura, Michelle smiled to the redhead. She's a newer friend, but I thought I'd invite her anyway. I have others, but it's a work day, so I wouldn't miss this. Laura grinned, clearly thrown by the swiftness of the courtship. Rose rolled her eyes, clearly indicating her disbelief that any of this was a good idea, but kept quiet. Nathaniel could see that took some doing, and he imagined she must have given Michelle quite a bit of grief over this decision. He was just glad she hadn't talked her out of it. With his future wife's hand tightly held in his, he turned and introduced his packmates. Ladies, this is Eli, Dontae, and Durant. He turned back as each one inclined their head in respective order. Locking eyes with Michelle, he saw love gazing up him. Come with me. She nodded and let him lead her to the door. He listened through it and heard the previous ceremony coming to a finish. He paused with his hand on the doorknob. When he knew it was time, he walked her in just as the other couple was leaving. The city workers smiled at the large party's arrival. Their friends stood back a few steps as Nathaniel and Michelle walked to the front and faced one another in front of an older man in a tired suit, who waited to perform the ceremony. He went through the normal verbiage without much romance, and when he started to give them the usual vows, Michelle shook her head. I want to say my own. Sorry, I should have warned you. I just thought of it. Though, she said with a shaky voice. Just now. I don't want the same old thing. He smiled at her. I don't need time to prepare. I know what I want to say to you. She flushed happily, a small shy smile on her lips. Taking a deep breath, she began. Nathaniel, I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life. Promise to always be loyal and to treat you with the utmost respect. I vow to you today to work through whatever problems we may encounter as the years go by and when we change and grow. I promise with all of my heart to truly love you in the deepest sense of that word. There were tears in her eyes and he squeezed both her hands and kissed her. Not yet, said the county clerk. Throwing him a sideways smile, he cleared his throat. Looking into Michelle's soft brown eyes, he told her, Michelle, I promise to love and protect you every day for the rest of my life. I promise to support you in whatever you do, and to be your greatest friend. I vow to take care of you and treat you with the respect you deserve. I promise to make love to you with passion and commitment from this day forward." She chuckled and a tear escaped. He bent down and kissed its trail, this time uninterrupted, as there was not a dry eye in the room. "I promise to grow and change with you, and to share everything. I am to be honest and have no secrets. I will work through problems. I will be on your team. Promise you that. You have my word." The county clerk cleared his throat. "Nathaniel Jacobs, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Nathaniel said firmly, "I do." "And Michelle Nero, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She gazed up at him and choked. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride again." Nathaniel crushed her to him and kissed her deeply as her arms swung around his neck. She pulled him close and they kissed until their friends were whooping and hollering, the clapping echoing loudly off the sparsely decorated room. The newly married couple separated, laughing, and shook the clerk's hand. Before they turned back to grin at their friends, Michelle threw the bouquet without warning and it hit Rose in the face. Rose laughed and held the flowers, rolling her eyes at them and not seeing what Nathaniel had, that Eli had a special gleam in his eye as he looked at the blue-eyed female. "Now what?" Dontae asked with pretend gruffness. "Move to Brooklyn and buy a house. Ridiculous. All of this." Nathaniel threw his arm around his new wife. "We're staying in Manhattan." She nodded, beaming at him. "It's been decided." "Well, with the rate this is going, she'll be having his child by Thursday," Laura quipped. "Right," Rose said dryly. She pointed her finger at Michelle. "Don't you dare." Nathaniel exchanged a look with his packmates. All of them knew from her scent that his bride wasn't fertile just yet, but that would soon change. He smirked and started for the door, his arm still around her. "Let's go eat." Cheers from the group as they followed them out, their footsteps echoing loudly off the hard tile. Nathaniel heard Eli asking Rose, "So what do you do?" "I'm a lawyer," she said with casual lightness. "Hot." Dark's voice rose over the clattering heels. "No dating, remember?" Nathaniel grinned over his shoulder to see Eli throw up his arms in mock innocence. "What? I'm just asking the pretty lady a question." Sunlight burst onto them as the double door swung open. Michelle whispered up to him, "Hey husband." "Yes, wife. I just had to say it." He stopped at the top of the steps before the group descended, and kissed her. Again, as though no one was watching, they heard the voices of their friends fade away. They'd given them a moment alone. Nathaniel felt such a rush as he held her, knowing she was here to stay. He looked at Michelle and he said in a husky tone, "Remember I said no secrets?" She nodded. "I have to confess something then." Her eyebrows tilted up. "I didn't think you were going to come." Tenderness warmed her eyes and she rose on her tiptoes to kiss him before saying, "And I didn't think I'd ever meet the one. See, we were both wrong." He grinned, grasped her hand and led her down the steps. Their friends waited at the bottom, talking amongst themselves. They turned to watch them coming down and broke into applause. Nathaniel called out, "All right, enough. I'm starving. Let's do this." The seven walked into the city feeling their lives were changed and changed forever. You just never knew when a path would turn and take you where you never thought you'd go. Eli. This series is all standalone. Chapter 15. High is it when your friends get married, all of a sudden the clock ticks. Like someone slyly lodged a time bomb in your uterus dead center. What are you thinking of having? The voice interrupting Rose's apocalyptic wanderings was deep and hinted at sex, even though the reception of seven was only on their way to breakfast. The walk from the wedding to here had been filled with lively conversation. Amidst the now entwined two groups of friends, it had given Rose a chance to sneak away into the privacy of her own thoughts. More than once. The groom and his buddies? This was the first she'd met any of them, even though she was the bride's best friend. It had been a whirlwind romance, to say the least. And while Rose hadn't at all understood the rush and had given Michelle a hard time the entire morning as they got her ready, she kinda changed her mind after spying four stunning male creatures waiting outside the city clerk's office in their best suits, looking adorably nervous. The one her bestie married was gorgeous, like stepping straight off a magazine. Good looks. And his 3 friends? Beefcakes. Each very different. She'd never seen men this imposing before. At least not in a cluster. The one currently vibrating her chest with bass tones was Eli. Rose didn't know his last name. She only knew that when she'd first laid eyes on him back at City Hall, her panties nearly vanished, hoping they were psychic. But after, on the way here, the other 2 groomsmen walked between she and Eli. Barring any possible conversation, the move seemed purposeful, which was both annoying and insulting. The cock-blockers must have gotten distracted in reading the menu outside the popular downtown New York brunch spot, because now Eli stood next to her, a dimple scorching his stubbly cheek. She blinked at him, surprised and more than a little pleased he was focused on her. Sorry? Did you say something? His mischievous eyes flickered like she'd slapped his ego just a hint. You're miles away. What were you thinking? Rose glanced to his lips and then cast blue eyes downward, tucking a stray lock of light brown hair behind her ear. That I don't even want to get married, so why am I suddenly so googly now that my best friend did that? I don't believe in society's conventions. That I'm a career woman, damn it. Nothing. I was thinking about a case. Eli's eyebrows lifted slightly as he rubbed his head. She glanced up to watch the subconscious move, the muscles of his biceps pulling at his black suit jacket in such a teasing way. She glanced away quickly so as not to stare. The group filed into the cozy, brightly lit restaurant, but the place blurred out when Eli touched her arm, stopping her. Her entire left side sprinkled with goosebumps. A case? He asked. Are you a social worker? She gave him her best smile, the one that got her number into handsome strangers' phones. In a way. Yeah. That dimple was like an all-natural aphrodisiac. What's in a way? You either are or you aren't. She liked his challenging tone. With eyes shining, she admitted. I'm a lawyer. Start running now. A lawyer? Really? He smirked. I'm not going anywhere. Oh yeah. She whispered as though saying, you should know I'm not wearing panties. Yep. Not running. Eli. Both hesitated before they looked over to discover Dark poking his body out of the cafe. His Scottish-bred temper betrayed as he nearly shouted, Eli, get over here. Rose stifled a scowl. Why doesn't he want us talking? Amused, Eli said. Sorry about him. It's my fault. I made him a promise. What promise? He held her glance until her frown disappeared. When I'm not sure I'll be able to keep with you looking at me like that. Her lips parted as he left her to playfully shove his friend inside. Calm your shit down. Dark grumbled and went in. When they got to the table, Dark was seated in the middle chair, one free on either side, leaving Rose and Eli unable to sit by each other. Everyone was of course focused on the newlyweds. Feeling confident he'd find a way to talk to her again, Rose sat opposite Michelle, smiling widely as her friend reached over and squeezed her hand. 2 hours passed with omelets, crispy bacon and jam on toast, one mimosa raised after another to accompany heartfelt toasts. At one point, with Nathaniel distracted, Rose leaned in and whispered, Michelle, I can't believe you did this. Her best friend blushed on a shrug. I really don't know how I got so lucky. When the party drew to a close and the 2 lovebirds rode away in Nathaniel's limo, Rose lingered behind with Laura, Michelle's designer friend. She pretended not to be waiting for Eli to come over. The minutes ticked away. Nice meeting you both. Eli finally called over his shoulder as he headed off, with Dark and Dontae without her digits. Rose stared after him. Well, fuck him then. Something wrong? Laura asked. Rose blinked back to the redhead and forced a convincing smile. It's just a bummer to have to work after such a fun morning. Honey, I hear that. Laura gave her a hug. You should come by the shop sometime. I will, Rose lied, returning the hug. She didn't have time for buying dresses with her latest case breathing down her neck. Men are a distraction I don't need. I love being single. I love not getting my heart broken. I love... Why didn't he ask for my freaking number? Chapter 16. Oh man, yes. Eli shouted. This is what I'm talking about. Standing under a sign that read Bluestone Lane Coffee, the ponytailed barista laughed and handed him the triple espresso. His usual. Every day it's like, it's your first time. He pointed at the drink, completely missing the gleam of longing she barely hid behind teenage eyes. Boyish enthusiasm coming from a devilishly handsome man in a snug, exquisitely tailored black suit was truly disarming. Have you tasted this stuff? It's addictive. Angel sweat swimming around in a paper cup. Breathing in the steam and bitter smell, he shook his head like it was too hard to believe something that delicious could be real. He gave her a wink and stepped back from the wood-paneled counter. See you tomorrow, Tracy. Bye, Eli. Since it was almost 5 p.m., the place was packed with suits, those of Wall Street traders. He was definitely not one, but he did work as an architect there in downtown, also known as the financial district. After the conclusion of a successful meeting, he'd run from the offices of DDN Incorporated, hoping the clock wouldn't beat him out of his fix. The suit had made that run challenging, but he wore one more often than not, as did his 3 packmates whose initials made up the firm's name. Dontae, Darrick, Eli, and Nathaniel. All 4 wolves loved dressing the part of the driven human male, having chosen a city life over the woods of their youth. The city was where their hearts were. New York has the best theater in America, incredible foods whose origins spring from all over the world, art in every form, from painting to sculpture to performance. This was the place where they could erect skyscrapers from their ever-expanding imaginations. And don't forget excellent fucking coffee. Eli maneuvered his broad shoulders so that he could move past the crowd without spilling a precious drop in the confined space. From the line he heard a whispered, "I'm sorry." Eli glanced to the woman out of instinct. A frown sliced his forehead and he stopped walking. He couldn't help but stare before he realized he was doing. It seemed these women always called to him, like there was a guardian angel watching over them who poked him in the shoulder to say, "Hey, look, stop, help." This time it was simply, "I'm sorry," an apology, even though she hadn't bumped him nor he her. Her black eye was yellowing around the edges with time, and her nose was purpled, sliced across the bridge. He knew what a punch did to the nose. He'd gifted enough of them. On her, the bruising differed in colors. The one on her nose was bright purple with a fresh, dark red scab. They didn't happen on the same day, which meant they were no accidents. She kept her attention fixed on the footprint-covered, dark tile beneath her feet. She was petite, and her brown hair, while clean, was thin and wispy. She looked to be no more than 33, maybe a lot less. Pain has a way of aging a person. He knew they'd never met. "Hey, do I know you?" Glancing up then back down, she shook her head. "No, I don't think so. Sorry, I was just staring. It's just you look really familiar," he lied, offering a friendly smile. "How's your day going?" Her lashes flitted like a hummingbird's wings as she struggled to keep her eyes locked on the floor. "Good, thanks." Even over the many conversations, the sound of the espresso machine and coffee grinder, Eli could hear her heart race with nervous energy now that he was focused on listening. He took a sip of his Tripoli. "Good. Mine too. I'm just glad I made it here in time. Have you tried their espresso?" He rolled his eyes at his cup like there was nothing better in the world. She gave him a sideways look in an effort to answer, but keep hiding her face. "I think they use espresso when making lattes. I only get those." "Ah, I haven't tried a latte. Are they good?" "Mom." A dark-haired man in a navy blue suit left the register holding a steaming cup of Joe, his coin tip still rattling in the jar as he walked away. The woman took his place to order. Eli could tell she didn't want his attention, but that was too bad. She had it. He had to find out who did that to her. He had to help. Pulling out his wallet and jogging his chin to Tracy, he stepped up to join the female stranger. He needed more time to get her name. "This is on me." She glanced up in surprise, unintentionally giving him a closer look at the other side of her face. There was a fresh scar on her cheek close to her right ear, maybe a month old. As though he noticed nothing peculiar, he smiled. He'd had years of practice at being a great liar, a necessary art for any supernatural creature living in a natural world. "I'm avoiding work," he told her, adding some truth for good measure. "You're giving me a great reason to stay here longer." She hesitated and ordered a soy latte. Eli ignored the inquisitive look Tracy tried to give him, but watched as her ponytail bounced when she turned to go make the drink. He knew this woman wouldn't turn down his offer to pay. Her doing so might have drawn more focus to herself rather than less, which she wouldn't want to do with her face all banged up like that. He was very, very careful with how he held himself around her. He was an inch over 6 feet tall, which wasn't too uncommon among human males, but his easy confidence layered atop the ever-present wolf residing in his soul gave him power that intimidated many. All werewolves are effortlessly imposing. To make matters worse, he kept his hair very short, and longer hair can make a man look softer. If he wanted to, he could scare the shit out of a linebacker. But Eli had his smile going for him. Save for when he was angry or impatient, a twinkle was forever present in his amused masculine brown eyes. And then there was the dimple, every woman's downfall. He used it freely now with her, always keeping a casual ease that said he wanted nothing and was simply enjoying the beautiful day. He needed her to trust him. I've tried all the coffee in the area, but they can't hold a candle up this. I think it's candle to this, she smiled, stifling a laugh. Oh, that sounds right. He laughed loudly. Where'd that saying come from, I wonder? But the hours are stupid. Sorry, Trace. He whispered to the stranger. Don't they know people want coffee at night? Who closes at 5 p.m.? She nodded but kept her attention on the ground beans poured into the machine. The soy milk steamed and the cup lay on the counter, keeping his body facing slightly away so he didn't seem like he was coming onto her. He gently persisted. When you're out at a restaurant at night, don't they always ask if you want coffee with your dessert? The answer is always yes, she smiled. Exactly. It's always yes. He downed his cup. It was a bitch to make espresso. Last even when there were 3 shots of it. He called over. Tracy, I need a couple more. It's gone already. I wonder why, the barista laughed. You're addicted. A small smile lit up the woman's eyes as she glanced to Eli like they had something in common. That's why I ran all the way from home before they closed. Eli pointed east. I work a few blocks from here, so I always make sure to come before they shut their doors. Some nights, I fail. Those are the worst. I don't come every day, but when I can, I do. Tracy returned with a way too kind and obvious smile. Eli gritted his teeth as the woman caught on that Tracy felt sorry for her. Before he could think of a way to stop her, she ducked her face, grabbed the latte, thanked Eli under her breath, and took off for the door. Watching her maneuver past the line, he set a 10 on the counter. What do you think happened to her, Eli? He picked up his fresh double shot and said in a booming voice on an easy laugh, she plays softball. Her team sucks. Took one to the noggin the other day and called me about it all whiny. She's just embarrassed. The woman looked back at him and blinked. He met her surprise without showing anyone who might be watching that he was lying. He even threw in a wave, which she returned with a shrug to Tracy like he's right. Then she struggled with the door handle and scurried out the door. You guys are friends? Tracy had apology in her eyes. I didn't mean to assume she. It's all good. Don't give it another thought, he grinned. Keep the change. Gorgeous. I'll see you tomorrow. She beamed. Okay. As she picked up the bill and watched him leave. Chapter 17. Your Honor. Rose gestured to where rival attorney Thomas Connors sat with his client Robert Lovell, owner of the packing company, trying to cheat Mrs. Wanda Levine out of her 28 years of earned pension. It's plain as the distended mole on Mr. Connors' cheek that the defendant and his company are just being greedy bastards. Objection. Mr. Connors stood up, his glare indicating a long history of previous cases opposite Rose Hendricks. Rose shook her head sadly. I object to the mole too. I do. Really needs to be looked at. And I also object to Louisville packing and shipping, thinking their mansion in the Hamptons is far more important than my client's meals or dental work. Or objection. Thomas Connors shouted. Your Honor, Miss Hendricks is appealing to your sense of. Rose quickly offered decency. His face went red as he grated. I was going to say humor. All right. Enough. The Honorable Judge Theodore Givens rubbed his temple with one leathery set of fingers and raised his other in a motion that said sit. Your ass is down. Miss Hendricks. Rose took her seat and raised innocent eyebrows. I know you consider yourself very amusing, but it has been a long week, so could you please stop provoking Mr. Connors? Yes, Your Honor. I didn't realize Thomas was so sensitive. If I'd had any idea. Judge Givens raised his hand to silence her again but suppressed a smile. Fine. Fine. I don't need to hear any more anyway. I've made my verdict. He directed his attention to the defense. Mr. Louvel, after hearing from co-workers and management about Mrs. Levine's performance, and seeing the history charted very thoroughly in company reports, I not only rule that you reinstate her pension, but fine you an additional $100,000 for darkening her good name. Court adjourned. He slammed the gavel down and stood up. Rose felt the embrace before she saw it coming. I can't believe it. Thank you. Rose shot a glance to Thomas Connors as she patted her client. You're welcome. Wanda, you deserve only the best. Mrs. Levine sat back in her chair and covered her cheeks with her hands. $100,000 in my pension. What am I going to do with myself? Rose touched the woman's shoulder with kindness. Hopefully relax and enjoy yourself a little. Maybe go on a vacation. Having spent over a year on this case, she knew everything about her client's situation. A devoted office worker who'd gotten stuck in a routine, she hadn't stepped out to explore the world in a long, long while. It's time, Rose added, withdrawing her hand. She made a noise as the wind got knocked out of her with another grateful embrace. Okay, you're going to get my new suit all wet, she said, but she really didn't mind. Wanda reached for her purse, tears racing down her face. I have to call my son. He lives in Texas and didn't think the judge was going to make a decision today. He's coming next week. She froze with the phone in her hand and looked at her lawyer. Do you think I could still have him come visit? Rose laughed. Hell, tell him you'll pay for it. Wanda reacted with joy and dialed. Thomas waited in the middle of the aisle for Rose to join him. She glanced over and wished there was another way out, but there wasn't. If he would just shake her hand and act like a decent human being. She mouthed, I'll call you, to Wanda and gathered her things, bracing herself for the impending wrath of a sore loser. Chapter 18. The woman sure could walk fast. She was a block away by the time Eli found her. He jogged up to join her, matching her pace. Hey, you forgot this. He handed her a plastic cap to cover the paper cup. She glanced to it with a disturbed look as she took it from him. I heard what you said to that woman. Why'd you say I got this from softball? Well, where did you get it from? He dodged a woman walking her dog and downed the last of his new espresso. She didn't lose a step. I was mugged. He tossed his empty cup into a nearly full public trash can. That's awful. Did it happen down here? What streets should I avoid? She glanced over and caught the smile in his eyes. She half chuckled. I don't think someone like you has to worry. Yeah? You think I could take him? He comically stood up straighter and bulked up his shoulders like a bodybuilder. She grinned and shook her head, slowing her pace to normal. You're very strange, you know that. Yeah, I get that a lot. He stopped walking altogether and she joined him, looking up without hiding her face for the first time. Listen, I gotta go. Sorry I chased you down like that. Didn't mean to scare you. You didn't, she told him. Good. It's just I thought that if it was someone you knew who did that, he pointed to her shiner, then to her nose. And that then I have the number for some shelters that could help. But since you were mugged, I guess it's not necessary. Desperate to not meet his eyes, she held her coffee in both hands and looked toward the passing cars. Nope. I was mugged, so. He held out his strong hand, palm up. I'm Eli Jackson. Diana. She went to shake his hand, but he kissed hers instead and brought a flush to her face. He grinned in a brotherly way, let it go and shoved his hands in his pants pockets. Diana Carl from Amanda and Kathy's party? She blinked. No, I'm Diana Carter. But that's close. Carl Carter. He laughed. Well, at least I was close. All right, you have a good day. She smiled a real smile as he turned to go. Thanks for the coffee. He nodded a goodbye and headed back in the direction they'd come. After a couple steps, she called after him. Sir. He turned around and rubbed his head with a big smile. Eli. Call me Eli. The cloud had returned to her eyes and she glanced around the street before. She asked, why do you have the phone numbers for shelters? Do you know people who needed them? He licked his lips to hold back the knot that began to grow in his throat. Her asking that question with her face all bruised and her eyes so sad it broke his fucking heart. Too many. But not as many I used to. Oh. She stared at him, not understanding it was he who'd reduced the number of women who needed shelters personally. and he checked back on them periodically to reassure himself they were in better places now. He waited, not sure if she'd ask him for the information. It would take a lot, considering she'd be outing her lie. But she still had some fire left in her. He could see it in her smile. The bastard hadn't beaten the flame completely out of her, at least not yet. Her mouth opened to speak and his heart raced with hope. Come on, Diana. Ask me for the numbers. Say you weren't mugged. Be brave. You can do it. Nice meeting you, she said with a faraway look. This time forcing a smile was difficult. You too, Diana. He walked away thinking about her. Diana Carter. He was going to find out who did that to her and make the Chapter 19. It's not that he was a bad lawyer, but Thomas Connors played it careful and it showed in his bland wardrobe and haircut. His entire presentation screamed, I'm horrible in the sack. Rose faced him where he waited in the courtroom's center aisle and held her briefcase in front of her body. When are you going to grow up and act like a professional? Thomas demanded. Does growing up mean losing? If so, I don't wanna. He cocked a well-shaven chin as his eyes became steel. You don't win every time. Take it down a notch, Miss Hendricks. Why don't you bring it up a notch, Thomas? She said his name like the sound of it was disgusting to her palate. Like spend a little money on a tie that doesn't make you look like a dead fish, for example, and get that mole checked out before it kills you. Not interested in his reaction, she walked right past him without a backwards glance. She'd only stopped to be polite, but if he couldn't have the good manners to shake her hand, then fuck him. Her 2-month-old burgundy heels tip-tapped along the cold courthouse hallway tile and she glanced down at them, remembering the same sound tripled when she, Michelle and Laura hurried to get to the wedding on time only 2 weeks ago. Her heart kind of hurt thinking about that day. Her best friend had found her guy and here Rose was winning another case and not having anybody to call to tell the news to. She'd call Michelle as she always did, but calling a best friend wasn't the same as when a male voice massaged her ears with a congratulations that said he couldn't wait to get her clothes off and show her who had the power for real. She wanted a man in her life, one who didn't mind. Her job came with busting a few dozen balls. She pulled out her phone and dialed her girlfriend, paused in the hallway, tapping her foot and listening to the unanswered ring. Come on, Shell. Pick up, she whispered. They'd met 2 years ago when a client hadn't wanted to pay Michelle for her services. Rose had upheld her reputation by getting Michelle the money owed her plus a lot more. The two women hit it off on their first meeting and had been inseparable ever since, at least until Nathaniel arrived. They hadn't gone out once since the wedding, which was normal, but it still sucked. When the voicemail message came on, she sighed. Hey, it's me. Again. I won a case. Again. Her voice showed no celebration, which isn't nearly as much fun. If I can't share it with you, call me back, you jerk. I get you're all blissed out and everything, but call me back. She paused and used to the loneliness she'd heard in her own voice. Glancing around her second home, she watched for a searching moment the winners and losers convening outside the many-closed courtroom doors. She'd won her client back, what was her right, and here Rose was feeling depressed. That wasn't like her. It nagged at her that something had to change. She was only 30 and she was already losing her love for the chase? That couldn't be. She was a driven go-getter who prided herself on doing more and winning more than any of the attorneys at the firm she worked at, especially Paul, her only competition for becoming a junior partner. Walking through the heavy double doors, she headed down the long stairs. I'll walk home today. It'll clear my head. And then I'll run a hot bath, light a shit ton of candles and put on my KT Tunstall playlist. Maybe go to bed early for once. Maybe I just need some sleep. Miss Hendricks. A female voice called out from behind her. Rose turned and saw Wanda waving by the double doors, the phone still tightly to her ear. My son wants to thank you. Rose waved back, a grateful smile warming her stomach. Tell him it was my pleasure. And tell him I said to get his butt out here so you can take him to dinner. Wanda laughed and sent another enthusiastic wave. With her heart lightened, Rose headed off. Thank you, God. I needed. Chapter 20. Espresso propelled a stormy stroll through the streets of downtown. As he neared the courthouse, Eli pulled out his phone and dialed his packmate. He only had to wait one ring for a curt, "What? About time you answered, Dontae," he joked dryly. What are you doing? Watching porn with your dick in your hand. A wry laugh came through the phone. I'm not you, Eli. Your only flaw, Eli smirked, glancing up at the graying light thanks to high-rise buildings blocking the waning sun. His wolf loved it. And I don't need porn when I've got real live women. Asshole. Are you looking in a mirror again? You're ridiculous, Dontae chuckled. I need you to look up someone for me. Diana Carter. The sound of heavy fingers smacking the keyboard was instantaneous. What it? You see. Beaten pretty badly and over time, I managed to get her to talk with me for a while, which wasn't easy. She lied to me about who did it. Of course she did. Women love to lie. Eli let that one slide. Dontae was into fighting the good fight and protecting the innocent just as much as Eli, Dark, and Nathaniel were, despite the fact that sometimes the innocent included women. Fucking Catherine. After her. Dontae had become a walking bitter icicle when it came to the fairer sex, but he was more a sucker for justice than he was for holding a grudge, and so he kept typing. Eli watched a couple of suits laughing together as they passed him. Flush pockets brought a certain kind of grin to a man. The Dow Jones must have had a good day. Diana Carter. Looks like there are 6 of them in New York. 2 in the financial district, 1 blonde, the other brunette. She had brown hair. Not thick. She could have dyed it. Women can't stick to anything. What color were her eyes? Blue, Eli answered, getting irritated by the broken record that was Dontae's broken heart. It might be this one then. The other has brown eyes. But she could have been wearing contacts. Blue ones. Dontae. I'm just saying. Just give me the address. Dontae huffed impatience and told it to him. Eli memorized the street number. He realized they'd been really close earlier. She said she'd run from home. Well, she didn't have to run far. Wondering if she was married or if it was just a boyfriend doing the damage, he asked. Dontae. Anyone else live there? As his packmate typed, Eli saw walking toward him a pretty woman in a black suit, her wine-colored blouse matching conservative heels. She stared at the traffic rolling by like she didn't really see it. He recognized her immediately from the wedding and the breakfast they'd gone to afterward as a group, and suddenly the typing he'd been listening to completely lost his attention. Her light brown hair was tied up in a high bun with stray long wisps framing pink cheeks. Her curves in that suit were even more attractive than they had been in the dress she wore the day he met her. His wolf woke up, immediately catching Eli by surprise. Through the phone, Dontae grumbled, I don't like your attitude. I can voice my opinion about women, especially. Aware of her approach, Eli lowered his voice and cut Dontae off. I see. Someone we know. You can chastise me later. Anyone live with Diana? Dontae growled. Yep. One person. A Lewis West. Great. Hanging up the phone, he waved, his smile showing surprise. Rose. Hey, what are you doing over here? She glanced to him and her blue eyes blinked, then narrowed as she tried to place him. He spied the courthouse behind her. That's right. You work over there, don't you? I'm sorry. I forgot. He cocked his head to the side. Nathaniel's roommate, Eli, remember? Recognition sprang into her big blue eyes. Right. Eli. I'm sorry. I totally forgot your name. His ego took a hit. He couldn't deny it. He rubbed his head, a defense mechanism he often used to calm himself or gather his thoughts. No big deal. So much was going on that day. The whole wedding thing, and they both let it drop and stared at each other for an awkward moment. How'd it go over there? He glanced to the courthouse. She followed his eye line and adjusted the strap of her purse with one hand, her leather briefcase in the other. Oh, I won a case today. A whiff of her scent drifted to him and his eyebrows shot up. Oh yeah? Congratulations. She stared at him with something in her eyes he couldn't read. Thank you. Eli. I needed someone to say that. What was the case about? He cocked his head to the side and crossed his arms, motioning to her briefcase first. That's a nice one. She glanced to it. Thanks. My mom gave it to me when I finished law school. My dad was an attorney too, but he died when I was 15. Her eyes flickered. I'm sorry, Eli said gently. She gave a little shrug. It was a long time ago, but on days like this I wish he knew I followed in his footsteps. It'd be nice to see his face in the back of the room watching as I argue against. Shaking it off, she forced a smile. The case? It was another big company trying to screw over an employee, so they could be richer than they already are. I'll never understand why people can't look out for each other more. He wanted to tell her about what he and his friends did, and the urge hit him hard. He frowned at the bizarreness of such an impossible impulse. Of course, he couldn't tell her. Their secret was so deeply entwined in their good deeds. Clearing his throat, he said what he could. That's great, Rose. I'm glad. You're on the side of the good guy. The light in her eyes, how they looked almost gray with the fading sun, it was mesmerizing. Of course I am, she smiled. You've met my friend. She wouldn't hang out with a jerk, would she? He didn't react to her teasing as he should have. No smile came. He was distracted, his wolf beginning to pace inside of him for a reason he couldn't put his finger on. She moved a stray lock of hair that had blown onto her cheek, and it was like the city slowed down to watch. You okay, Eli? He dragged his eyes away from the pretty wisps blowing in the breeze. Me? Yeah, sure, I'm great. Say, what's that perfume? Her eyelashes fluttered to the ground as a blush rose in her cheeks. Vanilla? It's the only one I can wear without sneezing. Plus, I like it. An intensity had overtaken him that he was unaware of. You smell like heaven. She lost the smile. You smell good too. He bit his tongue as the urge to rip open that professional blouse she had on, right here on the street, gnawed at him. You sure you're all right? She asked, her concern genuine. What? He barely heard her. I'm fine. How are you? She laughed and pushed her hair back again, glancing to the sidewalk, unable to hold his look. He had no idea how hard he was staring at her, tracing all the lines in her face. She motioned to him. So what are you doing over here? And why are you looking at me like you're going to eat me? Shoving his hands in his pants pockets, he suddenly became very aware of himself and how he'd lost track of time and reality. Nervously he looked around and stammered. Oh, was I doing that? Why am I here? Good question. Was just taking a walk. Had a few too many shots of espresso, I think. He chuckled, and it sounded weird. I've been guilty of that. A lovely laugh spilled from her soft lips. Eli locked on her bottom lip as she licked it, then suggested, you should drink some water. It'll help. He glanced down to his pants, shoving his hands in his pockets in surprise. Eli blinked his way to traffic, reading the license plate so he could regain control. What is the matter with me? Horrified, he cut her off as she was saying, it'll wash the caffeine out of your... Yeah, I'll do that. Listen, it was good seeing you. He shoved his hands deep into his pockets to hide the growing bulge. What am I, pup? I've gotta go. The guys are waiting for me. And I'll catch up with you later. She looked confused as she stepped out of his way. Bye, Eli. He swore at himself for the dead tone he just heard her beautiful voice adopt. But what choice did he have? He couldn't throw her down on the sidewalk and have his way with her like his wolf was demanding he do. Shaking his head, he hailed a taxi and climbed in. Where to? Eli stared out the window. Anywhere. Just drive. The bearded cabbie met his eyes in the rearview and pulled deftly into traffic. Eli looked out the dirty back window. He watched her ass sway as she walked. Turn around, Rose. Turn around. He waited until the cab turned a corner and he could no longer see her, but she never looked back. She's not interested, he mumbled. And why would she be? I just acted like an asshole. The cabbie's bushy eyebrows rose up as he looked in the mirror again. Eli met his eyes. Take me to Keen's Steakhouse. If he couldn't give his wolf a woman, he'd give him a rare cut of meat. The fact that Keen's was all the way on 36th Street would give him a chance to calm down. Chapter 21. When Rose saw Eli walking toward her, she knew exactly who he was. She'd had a visceral reaction to him the day they'd met 2 weeks ago. He'd seemed to feel the same, winking at her while her best friend gave her vows, grinning as the bouquet hit Rose in the head, and then flirting with her in front of everyone as soon as the ceremony was over. His friend Dark shut it down, and the blonde guy, Dontae was it? Had looked at her with such foreboding it was as though he'd jumped right out of a horror film. At breakfast, Eli laughed when Dark took a middle seat at the rectangular table, forcing Rose and Eli apart. He seemed to lose interest in trying to talk to her after that. Rose, no dummy, acted like she didn't care, using her interest in meeting her best friend's new man to help her forget him. Not an easy thing to do when Eli's mere presence in the room was causing her mind to stray and her ears to listen to everything he said. More than once, she'd had to ask Michelle, "I'm sorry, what did you say?" He was extroverted, extremely confident, ridiculously charming, and had a smile that made your panties slide off even when you were still wearing your pants. He was obviously trouble, and trouble she loved. But when breakfast was over, he waved goodbye and didn't ask for her phone number. Disappointed, she'd put him out of her mind completely. And then bam, there he was walking right up to her on the day she'd won a case she'd worked over a year on. She couldn't help but ask herself, is he my present? As she took in his fantastic suit, this time paired with a tie, which just killed her. Thomas Connors should take lessons from guys like this. Because of her massive experience with cocky men, she pretended not to remember his name just to throw him off a bit and take his ego down a notch. It worked. He perked up and paid very close attention to her, so close she felt at one point as though he could see through her clothes. She was sure he was going to ask her out. The way he'd stared at her lips like he wanted to chew them had goosebumps rushing down her body. But then he lost interest again and couldn't get out of there fast enough. Walking home, she searched their conversation for where it went sideways, hoping she didn't make an ass of herself by looking too interested. Then it dawned on her why he'd run away. And it fit with his friend's actions as well. "He has a girlfriend," she muttered, disappointment overcoming her. "I should have known." The bubble bath earned back its appeal. Chapter 30. Waking up, Rose stretched and looked at the clock. Oh no. She leapt out of bed, hightailing it for the bathroom. She brushed her teeth while sitting on the toilet and simultaneously smoothing her hair down with her free hand. Running back into the bedroom, she dressed faster than she ever had, swearing under her breath before finally almost shouting, "How did I miss my alarm?" Women who want to be made junior partner at a law firm do not show up to work over an hour late, which is how late she would be by the time she walked through the oak doors of Hewlett, Leonard and Clarkson. Searching for her purse, she found it in the kitchen, the phone inside and the alarm long spent. She froze as she stared at the screen. There were 2 messages from Michelle. "Oh, now you call me." She shoved the phone in her purse, grabbed her keys and ran as fast as her conservative heels would let her. Mornings in the financial district were jumping. She was able to catch one of the many taxis driving around, hoping to make their cab rental fee as quickly as possible so the rest of the day would be profit. He didn't pay attention as she put on her mascara and nearly stabbed herself in the eye. She bit her tongue from chewing him out because he was doing what she needed him to, driving with the speed of light. Running up the steps to her firm's building, her mind had 3 things keeping it very busy. Michelle's unheard messages, being late, and Eli rushing to the elevator. She called to the security guard sitting behind his desk. "Morning, Harold. Miss Hendricks. You running late, huh? Is it obvious?" She laughed sarcastically. "Wish me luck." "You don't need it," he called after her as she scooted past other suits, 80% male, into one of the elevators. "Sorry. Excuse me. I'm late." She shoved into a tiny space, forcing everyone to squeeze closer together, which they clearly did not want to do. As the numbers lit up, everyone watched. Nobody said a word. Rose elbowed a couple people as she dug out her phone and played the voicemail. Michelle was riddled with apology, her voice urgent. "Rose, it's me. I just heard your messages. I lost my phone and then it died. I didn't hear your message about the case and then turn off the phone. The battery died. Congratulations on the case. I so wish I'd known. I swear Eli found my phone at my old place. I wanted to call you, but I didn't have your phone number or email, and so I was going to come by your place and tell you in person. I've been telling you to get on Facebook forever, and if you'd listened to me, this never would have happened." Rose's lips squished up. It was true. Michelle was a social marketing guru and knew everything about current networking sites, while Rose stayed far away. "I don't want people I prosecute stalking me on the internet," Michelle continued. "You can ask Eli. He'll tell you the battery was dead." Rose's stomach hurt just hearing his name. "Yeah, I'll call him right up. But hey, let me take you out for lunch. I don't have any big meetings today. Let me take you out to celebrate your win, okay? Please call me." The doors opened to the penthouse and Rose walked off, the last one on the elevator. She took a deep breath at the double oak doors, wrapped her hand around the handle and opened up impending doom. The receptionist raised sculpted eyebrows when she saw who it was walking in. Rose gave her a weak smile. "Morning, Luann." "Rose. You're never late. I figured you were already in your office." Passing her for there, she sighed. "Yeah, I didn't hear my alarm." They exchanged a knowing look. Loud footsteps coming down the hall around the corner were unmistakably those of Mark Leonard, a man whose presence scared small children. She took a deep breath as she turned to meet him. He quickly spotted her and did the strangest thing. He smiled. "Miss Hendricks. Exactly the person I was coming to see. Didn't you get my email? We're waiting for you in the conference room." He flipped around and gave her a nice view of his newly trimmed gray hair. "Did you get a haircut, Mr. Leonard?" she asked, as if everything was normal, meaning she was kissing his flat ass. "I did. Thank you for noticing." He swung open another set of oak doors and walked in ahead of her, which she liked. It made her feel like he saw her as one of the guys here that was politically important. Seated at the immense table that could seat 20 on any given day were the other two partners and one of their executive assistants, Alice Makers, a woman of 42 who'd been having an affair with her boss for 6 years. She sat calmly beside Michael Hewlett, age 61, as though they'd never wrapped legs around each other, and certainly not 3 times that week. Stuart Clarkson, a young 45, was cleaning his glasses, his diminutive frame made even smaller every time he was in the same room with his imposing partners. But he was a viper in the courtroom, and Rose took him more seriously than the other two who liked to showboat but had passed their ambitious, hungry days long ago. Mr. Clarkson never would. He stood and motioned to a chair. "Miss Hendricks, please sit down." Since Mr. Leonard hadn't realized she was late, she had no idea why they summoned her. Rose took a seat and set her purse on the empty chair next to her. Mr. Leonard joined the others at the end of the table, all 4 people, lit by the natural light coming in windows that spanned the entire south wall. The view of New York spectacular outside. Immediately, she began to sweat as she realized she'd completely forgotten her briefcase. Taking a deep breath and wiping her face clean of expression, she sat up straight and clasped her hands on the waxed wood table. "You all look very handsome today. And Alice, you look great in blue." Alice smiled politely. Mr. Leonard and Hewlett thanked her, but Stuart Clarkson just put his glasses on and stared. Mr. Leonard hit him with an elbow. "Come on now, Stu, you said you wanted to give her the good news." Rose blinked at the nickname. She'd never heard the Viper called such a friendly name before. He cleared his throat and without smiling informed her. "Wanda Levine used to babysit me. I gave you the case to see what you would do with it, and if you helped her, I promised myself we would make you junior partner." Mr. Leonard guffawed and smacked Stuart on the back. "I bet you wish you hadn't told us that before she won the case." Rose's heart expanded like it might burst. "Would you please say that again?" Mr. Leonard, remaining completely out of character, announced. "You're now a junior partner, Miss Hendricks. And the first female one we've ever had." Through gritted teeth, Mr. Hewlett grated. "Yes, quite." Mr. Leonard boomed like he was talking to a room of 50 people. And all because this man promised himself he'd help his babysitter. Now isn't that the funniest thing you've ever heard in your life? Pride knotted her veins as Rose's eyes narrowed. "Funny? All the work I've done, and you're calling my promotion funny?" She unclasped her fingers and wiggled them. "Does Paul know?" 3 pairs of male eyebrows went up slightly, while Alice remained cool and distant. Mannequins showed more emotion than this woman. Mr. Leonard, the more vocal today, by far lost some of his glee as he informed her. "No, we haven't told him yet." Paul was vying for partnership too, and Rose disliked him simply because he was sure he would get it over her, regardless of the fact that she was the better attorney. She'd graduated high in her class and ever since had been busting her ass to show what she could do. Paul rode in on his family's legacy, old money in upstate New York, and lawyers, all of them. He was passable as far as attorneys go, but he didn't have the fire Rose had, nor the track record. She sucked on her bottom lip as she realized how much Paul would hate this, even though it was what she'd worked so hard for. Now that it was presented like a piece of moist chocolate cake when she'd been living on stale crackers, she was desperate to eat it, but something felt wrong. They waited for her to say something. Hewlett glanced to the men to his right. who remained locked on her. She leaned forward and addressed Mr. Clarkson. So am I to understand I have received this incredible promotion merely because of a bet you made against yourself? He didn't answer. I work hard, harder than any of those people out there, she pointed to the door, and you know it. I win 83% of my cases, even some I know you throw at me because you thought they were dead in the water. Miss Hendricks, Mr. Leonard tried to interrupt. Excuse me, sir, but let me finish. Mr. Clarkson, if you're the one pushing me for junior partner, I need it to be because you know I bring value to this firm with my time, talent, and dedication. Don't get too full of yourself. You're very young, Miss Hendricks said Stuart Clarkson in a sober voice that sounded pretty fucking condescending. She smiled and got courtroom calm. I'm just stating the facts of what I bring. And there is nothing wrong with knowing one's worth. Did you know that men get more raises than women simply because they ask for them? They have no problem saying I deserve what I deserve. And how old were you when you made partner? She knew the answer was 29. He didn't offer it, and so she continued, becoming more theatrical and having fun with this now that her anger had ignited. But you're a man, right? I'm the first woman, you said? Why is that? When the feminist revolution happened in the 60s, that's 50 years ago. Why am I the first, and why do you say that like I should be proud? It only makes me angry for all the women who were passed over before me. I know many who've left Hewlett, Leonard, and Clarkson, but you want me to be proud? How can I be when their blood is on your hands? She started to understand what she was going to do. A light shone from her heart that guided her to stand up. She leaned forward with her fingertips on the table and her weight on them. Yes, I could take this job and make history, but I can't do that in good conscience unless you gave it to me for my abilities alone, or for them being at least 83% of the reason. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, for convening here today, and for offering me this very esteemed position. She picked up her purse. I regretfully decline. Stuart the Viper Clarkson had seen this coming as she'd been talking and showed no surprise, but both Hewlett and Leonard were shocked, which frankly showed that they were losing their touch. Alice kept blinking to the table. The window rose back to the table and then to all of them again. Rose smiled a real smile, remembering Eli saying she was strong. I'll send over my current cases. You'll have all the files by the end of today. Paul can finish them for me. He'll do a mediocre job that you'll be very happy with, because he has a penis that I'm going on a vacation. Mr. Hewlett winced at her crudeness, but Alice stifled a laugh. Rose grinned, happy to have at last made the woman's stiff veneer crack. Rose nodded goodbye. Good day, gentlemen. Good luck, Alice. It's been hard work, but it's been fun. She walked out.